basically, what lies behind our mistrust in the government and the doubts about the election, it's basically white racial fucking bias. As the FBI has continued making arrests in connection to the January 6, 2021 Klan insurrection, investigators, reporters, and political scientists are revealing that those who participated were mostly older white men, especially men who harbor deep mistrust in government institutions and basically an unwavering dick sucking into Donald Trump. Disinformation, campaigns, and conspiracy theories. The political scientist Robert Pape's profiles of the rioters show that the majority were regular citizens and not members of any extreme right organizations. Now, of course, far more Americans than just the rioters mistrust the government institutions anyway. Going back to the 60s, Going back to the 1960s, many white Americans have expressed low faith in the federal government, and that has important consequences. It's harder for any Washington government to enact any policy without very broad consensus that they are needed. Now, when policies impose cost on some but not others, low trust in government makes it difficult to get citizens to agree to pay for social benefits, and all that is visible today among Americans who resist mask and vaccine mandates that are meant to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, and low trust correlates with the more resistant. So, what is behind the low trust in any government? If you look back at the research that Alexandra Filindro did, she did research with Baya Buyuker and Noah Kaplan, and it shows that contrary to conventional wisdom, racial prejudice and more than convictions about policies has fueled the white Americans' hostility to government. Now, early research suggests that white Americans' mistrust in government began with such policies as school busing, the war on poverty's expansion of welfare, and the affirmative action. But when these policies were abandoned, trust remained low, and the research shows that public trust became chronically racialized. That is, and it became linked to white Americans' racial prejudice. Now basically we have used survey from the American the National Election Studies, also known as the ANES, and nationally representative survey conducted during presidential election years, and it's focused specifically on white respondents who participated in the survey going between the years of 1992 and 2020. For each year, we conducted statistical analysis to test whether people who scored higher on racial prejudice also scored lower on a public trust after controlling for many other factors such as policy preferences, partisanship, ideology, and demographics. Now, some say the U.S. is headed toward a civil war, while history suggests something totally different. Now, we found that in all eight surveys between 1992 and 2020, racial prejudice predicted lower levels of trust in government. For example, in 2020, white Americans who scored higher on racial prejudice and that are measured by agreement with negative stereotypes about black people were 9% less likely to express trust in government than those who scored low in the same measure. And it not and it is not only the trust in government that is associated with racial prejudice, but other work shows that racial prejudice has been a stronger predictor of the white Americans' doubts in the fairness of the 2020 election. Now, Martin Luther King was right. Racism and opposition to democracy are linked, and our research finds that. Many white Americans did not expect a fair election in 2020 because they're inbred and they're stupid. Now, in addition to the low trust in government, a significant proportion of the white Americans today distrust the election results in 2020. The ANES asked 3 questions to gauge the Americans' trust in the integrity of the presidential election. Now, these questions were asked before Election Day. Specifically, the ANES asked, in the November 2020 general election, how accurately do you think the votes will be counted? 27% of whites said that they expected the votes would not be counted accurately, and not at all or very little. An additional 35% expressed a moderate level of doubt, and only 38% were very confident in the election. Similarly, 21% said that they had no trust or very little trust in local election officials, while 31% said they had a moderate level of trust in local election officials, and 14% said people who are eligible to vote are denied the right very often or fairly often, which is shown as no confidence in the figure below. Now, the racial prejudice also fuels low trust in the fairness of elections anyway. But in a second study, we analyzed data from the 2012 to 2020 ANES results to test whether the racial prejudice is related to low trust in election fairness. Now, once again, statistical analysts focused on white respondents and accounted for other factors. We found that in 2012 and 2020, but not in 2016, racial prejudice predicted lower trust in election fairness. Now, others also have found that racial prejudice predicted lower trust in electoral outcomes in 2008 and 2012, but not in elections before Barack Obama's two terms. In 2012, the biased whites were 16% less likely than the other whites to say that the election count would be fair. But in 2020, the biased whites were 9% lower and less likely to think that the election count would be accurate anyway, and 6% were less likely to trust local election officials, and 5% were likely to believe that eligible voters are denied their right to vote. It is likely that racially prejudiced whites think of the white Americans when they think of eligible voters, and thus they have concerns about people like them being denied the right to vote. Now, the data suggests that whites who harbor negative stereotypes about blacks as lazy, unintelligent, or even violent may deem this group unworthy of political membership and therefore illegitimate voters. Now, the Republicans and Democrats have split over whether to support the multi-ethnic democracy, and the research finds this. Now, when people don't trust elections, it undermines our democracy. Now, the consequences of low confidence in elections can be grave. When people don't trust elections, they don't trust that the country is governed democratically. Scholars have shown that low trust and election fairness can alienate people from the political system, and it drives them to embrace anti-democratic leaders and policies. Now, many elected officials, including many up for re-election in 2022, seem to think that employing the racial dog whistle of critical race theory, the illegal voters and violent agitators, and the encouraging fears about stolen elections can be a winning strategy. Now, however, as we saw on January 6th of 2021, when people come to mistrust the government and its institutions, including the integrity of elections, democracy becomes vulnerable to grievances, passions, and even violence. And with the 2022 midterm elections around the corner, Congress may wish to vouchsafe the integrity of the nation's system of elections administration. For instance, it might install nonpartisan and independent monitoring and other measures that increase voters' confidence in election results. Now, the stability of our democracy depends on people believing in the institution. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you've been notified when a new video comes out. And also, if you want to support my work a little further, you can contribute to my Patreon page. All you got to do is go on my YouTube channel, click on the About section, and there's a link to Patreon. You can click on that, takes you right to the page, and you can support my work even further by donating just a little as a few bucks a month. It does and stuff like that. So, but I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back probably in another hour or two to do another video.